I appreciate the gentleman's pointing out the letter again. This is a letter that I had submitted for the record earlier in an earlier committee meeting. I do want to point out that what I said, and if you will look back on the record, you'll find what I said is that they expressed concerns, and they do later on in the text of this letter express concerns about the legislation, about the impact it's going to have on the boating industry, concern that the legislation does not preempt states from setting their own standards, concern that there's not a viable substitute at this time. So that's the point I was making, that they have concerns about that, about this legislation, the National Marine Manufacturers Association, and I yield back.
And yet they support it. I yield back the balance of my time.
The woman yields back, and I would just point out that essential use exceptions could be issued when no substitute is available, and this legislation does ensure that niche users are protected. So, any other members seeking recognition to speak on the underlying bill? For what purpose does the gentleman
to strike the
seek
last
recognition? The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if my colleague from Georgia wants a little more time here, but I just was a little confused on page 23 of the text, the AINS. On line 22, it says, authority, the administrator may, by regulation, and in accordance with this section, prohibit or restrict, including through a graduated schedule, the use of a regulated substance in a sector or subsector in which such regulated substance is used. Prohibit's a pretty well-defined term, I think. Yet I think I heard just a minute ago that this bill doesn't prohibit, but it certainly would give the authority to the administrator to prohibit. I would yield to the gentleman from Georgia.
And I thank the gentleman for yielding. Again, I want to point out, yes, the National Marine Manufacturers Association is trying to work with this legislation, but just as the point has just been made, these we are, through this legislation, you will be giving the administrator, much broad jurisdiction over this. And as they have pointed out here, there's not a viable substitute at this time. So the National Marine Manufacturers Association is saying that they want to work with this, but there's not a viable substitute at this time. It does not preempt states from setting their own rules. They have concerns, and those concerns are outlined in this letter. And I yield back.
And I appreciate the gentleman's comments.